Moving into the AFC South, we have the Houston Texans, and we have them as an early playoff exit. After seeing the success that we saw out of the Texans last year, out of CJ Stroud, out of that offense, out of that defense performing out of its mind under D'Amico Ryans, they bring in Daniil Hunter. They trade for Stephon Diggs. They bring in Kamari Lassiter in the draft. They bring in Joe Mixon as a running back option, upgrade from Devin Singletary. The Houston Texans are in right now. They want to compete for an AFC championship this year. They want to compete for a Super Bowl. Losing in the wild card or the divisional would be an upset, in my opinion.
No, it would be. And to your point, why am I blanking on what I was just going to say? Well, I'm sorry. What I was going to say is Kamari Lassiter, I'll start with this. Because there was a lot of questions as we've been addressing this kind of, even from the moment he got drafted. Kamari Lassiter's tape, you love it. The big question was, is his athleticism going to translate to being able to be like an outside corner in the NFL? And he's looked damn good at camp from everything I've seen, everything I've been hearing. Where he's been out here, he can guard, he can stay one-on-one with Stephon, he can stay one-on-one with Nico. If you're a Texas fan, that's like Christmas morning to hear his first year. I mean, especially knowing that that's one of the weakest parts of the team on a team that really doesn't have many weak points. I mean, everything you said is just, it's the bottom line with this team. Like, this team is a team that went from zero expectations to we have our guy and we have our guys. This is a roster that can 100% compete for the Super Bowl this year, contingent on the O-line just staying healthy and protecting CJ. I mean, really, like, even in terms of the skill position guys, you have room for, like, not speaking any of this into existence, but you have room for an injury or two on the offensive side, minus the offensive line or CJ, because you have so much depth, even on the O-line, for fuck's sake. I mean, you have a fair amount of depth all of a sudden, where that's kind of the reality. Is if you're the Texans, it's like there's no excuse to not improve this year, because you already had a really good year last year and you only improved and added way better depth. So every Texans fan would agree, you got to make a jump this year. And that's all there really is to it with the Texans.
Indianapolis Colts, you have them as a top 10 pick. I have them as top 16. I just think with what they added in the offseason in the draft with Latu and A.D. Mitchell, and if Anthony Richardson stays healthy, and I know it's the floor, but like, I'm not trying to do injury with Anthony Richardson because it's only been 1 year. I think with his legs, it gives them such a high floor, especially with the receiving options, and they added to an already kind of loaded defense. I personally don't see how they could be a top 10 pick this year. So let me know why your reasonings are.
No, you know what? I'm not even kidding when I say this. I'm switching. I'm switching without even thinking about it. Like, truthfully, I don't know what got into me. Like, you make fun of me in the comments. I don't know what got into me with this one. I don't know. I really don't know what I was thinking. Colts, you're right. I can't change Steichen what he showed us last year, even if, because that was kind of my thought process. I was like, well, I don't want to incorporate it with money teams, but with the Colts, it was kind of like, if A-Rich goes down again and the morale being down, but it's like, nah, Joe Flacco's there, upgrading the backup QB, and you upgraded a damn good backup QB. If Gardner Minshew is the second best backup QB in the league, Joe Flacco is the best, right? I mean, it's a good upgrade to have, right? It's not. I mean, also you can't get much worse from last season, if any worse. You shouldn't be getting any worse. They should be making improvement. Yeah, I'm switching. Fuck what I said about top 10. I was capped out. Top 16, without a doubt. This roster just made too many little improvements. They have way too good of an offensive line. The defense was playing very, very black and white last year. Like, there'd be a week where you're like, oh, this unit it's coming together. I can see the identity. And then the next week you're like, oh man, they give up like 500 yards. So that's the biggest question mark on this team, is just like, can this defense find an identity this year? But outside of that, I don't see them being any lower than the top 16 pick. I don't know what guy MD would say in top 10. I really don't. Sorry, Colts fans.
No, I mean, that's the biggest thing. I just think Shane Steichen elevates this team so much. And if you have an athlete like Anthony Richardson at quarterback, along with the additions that they made, I find it hard to believe, because they picked 15, that they're really picking any worse. I could even play with barely missing the playoffs, but I think I need to see a whole year out of A-Rich. But overall, we have them as top 16. Jacksonville Jaguars, we have them as a top 16 pick as well. I think the issue with the Jaguars for me, Dobbs, is we have yet to see like consistency for a long-term basis with the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence. they lose Calvin Ridley. I wasn't too upset that they lost him. I don't know if Gabe Davis was the answer. Brian Thomas Jr. was the answer. Now, I like Brian Thomas Jr. a lot. I do. And I think Eric Armstead was a great addition. But their wide receiver room is just kind of muddy to me. I don't see a clear one, between Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, and Brian Thomas Jr. Now, I love Evan Ingram, and I think Travis Etienne is a good player, but their line still scares me a little. It's just a very up in the air team this year.
No, yeah, like they are. And to jump right over to your point, because I've harped on Gabe Davis enough. If you've watched any of the content this offseason, you already know my spiel on Gabe Davis. I'm not going to get into it. I think as far as Brian Thomas Jr. goes, love the upside. But as we talked about before with BTJ, I guess, it's kind of like, we're in a realm where as an LSU faithful myself, like he's got hell of a talent, but the route tree is not all the way there yet. And I don't think that route tree is going to develop in just one offseason. Like, oh, he goes from being like generally just streaks, outs and curls to like he's got the whole number one route tree you're going to need to be that number one in this offense. And he's going to have to be because Christian Kirk's playing in the slot. Gabe Davis is not a number one. Gabe Davis at Y, it's as high as we're going to see him on the depth chart, right? So we're in a situation where your personnel doesn't necessarily match like what you need out of them to an extent. And about the O line, and again, I don't want to be clear, not BTJ can grow into being an amazing receiver. I just don't think like this season specifically, he's going to make every jump he needs to be that alpha, like 1,000+ yard, like, oh yeah, he's for sure that the X receiver we need kind of guy this year. I just don't know if I see that. And with the O line, like there's just, I'm going to say it in as nicely as possible. It's just a mitted out unit, right? Like it's very, very middle of the road. And if anything, Anton Harrison has got to make a really big jump this year for you to feel good about that pick last year. And on the defensive side of the ball, there's a lot of pluses as opposed to like, minuses. There's definitely much more good than bad. I wasn't a big fan of the way that they approached the depth necessarily in the draft this year. I feel like there was a lot of reaches. We could have done other things with the picks. I mean, we already talked about this in our draft episodes, et cetera, et cetera. But, the bottom line is, as we've said about the Jags, and I know you agree with this 100%, I can speak for both of us on this one. The Jags' direction is generally just a little bit confusing. Yeah. I don't know if that direction is going to lead to major improvement this year. I expect it to be similar to last year, except the difference being that they actually end up making the playoffs. But it's like, how much better are they going to be? I don't know.
I do see the Jags being a better team this year. I think Doug Peterson, if he takes back play calling, they'll be in a much better spot. So I just don't see the year that we saw from the Jags last year, where they started out pretty hot, and then maybe the one seed narrative was true hot, and then they blew it all up. But overall, I mean, I think they should be better with the additions that they made. It's going to be interesting to see how that offense works, though. Moving in to the Tennessee Titans, we both have them as a top 10 pick. So, Dobbs, why do you have them as a top 10 pick?
So I'll say this. So just to give Titans fans, some positives, some hope, something to cheese at here. I think of all the teams that I had in the top 10 range, I will admit the Titans are perhaps the most polarizing, where I look at them and I'm like, they've grown on me, I think is the easiest way I can say it. Like, from the beginning post-draft process to here today, June 13th, I think I've grown a lot on the Titans where I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, I'm starting to see the vision. Albeit that there's a lot of contingencies in that vision that have to go correctly. And I think that's why that their floor is having them be a top 10 pick. But what I'm really trying to say is like, they could completely shatter that expectation and like be a much better team than that. But again, I have to stick with my baseline and my objectiveness. The reality is we haven't seen enough out of Will Levis yet to be able to say for sure, like, okay, yeah, Will Levis is for sure going to make a big jump this year and 100% be the guy going forward. We've seen the flashes. Now we need to see it be consistent. But if that can happen this year with this receiving core, and if you got guys on the right side of the line that can make a jump, center through left guard and left tackle, you feel pretty good about at this point. All of a sudden, this offense could really be a productive unit with Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. This offense, I'm seeing the vision. And as far as the defensive end goes, a lot of people, like Devondre Sweat pick, Devondre Sweat was an overdraft. Bullshit. As far as schematically drawing up a 3-4 defense that the Titans are going to be running, having a Devondre Sweat is a complete fucking game changer of a move. So I don't, again, the pre-draft, whatever. They're playing football, man. Again, could these be red flags? Sure. But what the bottom line is, I expect Devondre Sweat to come in and have a hell of a rookie year and be one of the identities of this defense. And if he can be that, which I believe he can, all of a sudden Jeffrey Simmons, who had a pretty poor year relative to what we know Jeffrey Simmons' ceiling is, Jeffrey Simmons has a revitalization. Sebastian Joseph Day can play well off of that. Harold Landry can be a really productive pass rusher off of that. All of a sudden, and then the DBs get better because when the pass rush is better, we know all of a sudden, I gotta admit, the Titans are the most polarizing team that I have in the top 10 because they could completely shatter that expectation. It is so handedly on Will Levis's shoulders, though, that's why I couldn't, you know what I mean? I couldn't say they're going to be a great team or a good team, but it's possible. It's on Will Levis's shoulders. That's kind of just the bottom line for them.
I think that was my biggest thing is if Will Levis is able to mesh with the Brian Callahan offense. And another thing that you can think about is like they traded for L'Jarius Sneed. They paid him. What if he regresses? Like he's not old. He's 27, but we know that like cornerback years are real volatile. So if the O-line doesn't work like it's supposed to work and Will Levis can't get in a system, I think that's where we find that kind of top 10 finish. I don't think so. I think, like you said, like they're one of the most polarizing teams where you just don't know where they're going to end up, especially when they're in a division like the AFC South, who have really competitive young quarterbacks and really competitive young teams. So it's going to be a very interesting year for the Tennessee Titans.